Hello, 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 hello. Welcome once again to not a Prog Reborn, but the hopefully final set of Edge of Eternities spoiler review stream that I'm going to be doing. Probably going to do a overall bests and worsts of the set at a later date, but just raw looking at the cards and reacting to them. This is going to be our last set of streams for this. My name is M. Kosler. Like I said, this is not a Prog Reborn. I am a fairly long time Magic the Gathering player, played since Onslaught, Block, have had numerous times where I have fallen off the game, but have been back in a fairly big way since the release of Bloomborough. Am a multi-time, many-time Mythic player, primarily in Best of One Standard on Magic the Gathering Arena. I do have paper Magic experience, mostly from F&M experience within Limited on competitive formats, but do occasionally do paper Commander these days, as that's the primary way that people do paper Magic these days. And as far as this set review, as I've said on many of the previous set reviews, I'm primarily looking at this from a competitive 60-card standard perspective. If I feel like that there might be some modern playability or pioneer playability, I might mention it, as well as, obviously, since we're looking at the full depth and breadth of the set, primarily the majority of these cards will be for Limited, so I'll speak a little bit on their Limited playability, but it has been a long time since I've done Limited. I'm not a huge fan of the online Limited format. I like the idea of 8-player pods, or however many player pods, and playing within that draft pod, rather than sort of the league style pods that you get when drafting online. And then from a Commander perspective, I'm definitely not the right guy to look at, though I do have Commander experience and I do enjoy the format. I do not have the breadth of knowledge sort of required to really have a good grasp on where something like this might end up in Commander. If I see something that's particularly interesting to a particular Commander deck that I have, then I might bring it up, but the primary focus is on Best of One Standard, or really Standard, competitive 60-card Standard. So yeah, not much else on the preamble. Let's go ahead and get started. We left off the last set of the last stream of the set review with the remaining red cards going in color pie order. We went through white, blue, black. We're on to red. Any artifacts that were red, green, any artifacts that were spoiled, any multicolored cards that were spoiled, and any lands that might have been spoiled since the last time that we since the previous Friday, not last Friday, but the Friday after last. So yeah, let's go ahead and start it off with a Bombard. For 2 and a red, we get an instant at common. Bombard deals 4 damage to target creature. Limited removal for red, add common. That's where you're going to see this. 4 damage. for 3 mana is not really a constructed, for it that only goes to a creature is not really at the constructed level. If you're going to pay 3 mana for something, you'd really want for just creature removal in red, you'd really want to be getting 5 damage. 4 damage, you're looking for 2 mana. So not really constructed playable, in my opinion. Devastating Onslaught for XX and a red. We get a sorcery at Mythic. Create X tokens that are copies of target artifact or creature you control. Those tokens gain haste until end of turn. Sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. So this is one of those like Kiki-Jiki style red copy effects where you create a token that's a copy of something that you have, typically a creature, though this one can hit artifacts as well. You give those tokens haste, which is mostly relevant for being a creature, if it's a creature, and then they go away at the end of your turn. There's a lot of, I think a lot of people are comparing this to something like a doppelgang. Not nearly as powerful as something like a doppelgang. This only gives you X tokens of a single thing, whereas doppelgang gives you X tokens of X things. It's significantly harder to cast a doppelgang, and you need to put significantly more mana into it because it's 3 X's. But part of the power of something like doppelgang is 1, you're keeping them around forever. 2, it can hit any permanent, including lands, and can hit things that your opponents control. And 3, if your opponent removes your target if your opponent removes your target of this in response to its cast, the entire spell fizzles. Where with doppelgang, if you have at least one other target, then then even if they remove whatever they think might be the most devastating thing to get multiple copies of, this, you would still get copies of the other stuff, as long as they aren't able to remove. They would have to remove everything at the same time, which is pretty difficult to do. That said, this does give your things haste, and if you put, so for at 3 mana, this is worse than something like a Molten Duplication, which I think was in Big Score, which I think was just 2 mana to Kiki-Jiki something as a spell. When I say Kiki-Jiki something, it's this effect, but just with only 1 target. You create a copy of a creature. I shouldn't use shorthand like that when it could be people who are newer to Magic or entirely new to Magic. This does potentially give you a lethal swing. You really would want to probably cast this for X is equal to 2, so 5 total mana. X is equal to 3 gets you up to 7 total mana. You're probably winning the game at that point. But if you're just doing X is equal to 1, 3 total mana, you've got a better option out there for that. And if you just need that effect, all you need is 1 more, then just go with something like Molten Duplication. This is a big, powerful, splashy effect. I just don't think that it's that viable as a competitive constructed card. Next is Drill Too Deep. For 1 and a red, we have an instant at common. It has choose 1, put 5 charge counters on target spacecraft or planet you control, or destroy target artifact. So interestingly, this is a way to power up a station or planet, or sorry, power up a spacecraft or planet without having to have creatures on the battlefield, tap those creatures, and it's a way to power up a station at instant speed, or power up a station is good enough, at instant speed, as well as a way to, the reason that they put these things together is it's from a limited environment, this is probably there to destroy your opponent's spacecraft. I'd really have to see what's out there. I'd have to go back through the card list to see what's out there that turns on at just 5 charge counters, to see how viable this might be in constructed. I don't really think it's that viable. A Braid does see play even in main decks, but a Braid also is used as removal. Can be used as, you know, a 3 mana or 3 damage creature removal, as well as artifact hate. It's primarily the creature removal, but you get the artifact hate stapled onto it. So you'd really have to go back and see what is there out there that turns on at 5 charge counters or something close to 5 charge counters. Maybe you're fine with playing a spacecraft early, having some number get within 5 through normal station means, and then use this to turn it on out of nowhere. I personally think that spacecraft and planets are not really that viable, so I'm not so sure how viable this card is, but gonna reserve judgment because this is an instant speed way to get those stations charged up. Frontline War Rager. For 2 in a red, we have a creature Kavu Soldier at common. It's a 2/3 that says at the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It's a fine limited card, you know, in any sort of aggressive red deck. You have this as a curve filler. It can count itself as one of the tapped creatures. The way you're tapping it is primarily just through attacking, though obviously you can station up a spacecraft or planet to get them to be tapped, and then it just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. It'll be fine and limited as a curve filler that scales as the game goes long, but not really constructed playable. Full Bore. For a single red, we have an instant at uncommon. It says target creature you control gets +3/+2 until end of turn. If that creature was cast for its warp cost, it also gains trample and haste until end of turn. So this is another one of those cards where you really would need to go back and see what are some relatively cheap warp costs that have good stats. Generally, things with warp are going to have decent stats, but especially if we can get some things with good stats, that letting them actually attack on the turn that they were warped would be fairly devastating. Without a full look through, it's going to be hard to really know. If you just are using this as a pump spell, I don't really know if this is good enough. In the past, things like Infuriate weren't quite there, which is literally what this is. If you get rid of the interaction with warp spells or warp creatures. We still have the Fling decks because Burn Together will still be in Standard, because Wilds of Eldraine is the first set that came out after March of the Machines Aftermath. So not actually rotating. And so there's still worlds where a highly aggressive, pump spell red deck that's trying to go, trying to do slick shot show off, red mage's rapier, that kind of stuff, could still see something like this. Could make something like this see play. I think those decks are significantly weaker with the loss of Cacophony Scamp. But there's still a world where this could see play in just for that deck, and then without then if there are good enough cheap warp things that have high stats that would benefit that you could combo with full bore to smash in for a lot of damage early, then you're cooking with a pretty interesting aggressive deck, because you have both that smash in, and then you still have access to the card later should the game go on long enough. So a pretty interesting card to see printed. One thing to note before we get too much further, if you're doing the full bore thing on a warped creature, you're basically having to play it at instant speed, because you need to give the creature haste. So you can technically, I said instant speed. You're basically having to play it at sorcery speed. You can technically move to beginning of combat and then do it then before declare attackers, but this isn't a way. If you're trying to give something haste, you've got to do it at a point where your opponent is not going to be blown out by a combat trick. They're going to know it's coming and have the potential to blow you out with a removal spell. So that could be a limiter on the power of a card like this. But we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Back to invasive maneuvers. For 1 and a red, we have an instant at uncommon. Invasive maneuvers deals 3 damage to target creature. It deals 5 damage instead if you control a spacecraft. If your deck has no spacecraft synergy, you've got plenty of other better options. We just talked about Abrade. The Abrade is literally this card at instant speed, 3 damage to target creature, and you would get the opportunity to destroy artifacts. If you have spacecraft, then this becomes more viable. Again, I'm fairly down on spacecraft as a competitive constructed archetype, so I'm not sure that this card is going to see that much play, but it is something to keep in mind if you decide that, or if a spacecraft becomes viable in a competitive strategy. Kavarin Sky Warden. For 4 and a red, you have a creature Kavu Soldier at common. It's a 4/5 with reach. And then it has void at the beginning of your end step if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped this turn, to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So this is our first encounter with void in this stream. So void is everything in that sort of comma separated section. You're giving an additional benefit or changing the way that a card works if you meet the condition of something has a non-land permanent has left the battlefield, or you played a warped spell. I guess technically it's not you played. For this card, it's almost certainly going to be you played. But if you have an instant that cares about, or if you have an instant that has void, then if your opponent warps something, then it turns on void for you. This is really limited, a limited card, but it lets us remind everybody what void is. Note, this is kind of the fixed version of revolt. So if you're thinking about if any of these cards sort of strike your fancy for older formats, you can't crack a fetch land and get access to or turn on the void. Even in standard, there are things like Fable Passage and, Evolving Wilds-esque effects that would trigger Revolt if this was Revolt, but does not trigger Void. Kavarin Turbo Drone for 2 and a red. We have an artifact creature, Robot Scout, at common. It is a 2/3 with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. This is another way to give your warped creatures the ability to get into combat on the turn that you warped them. Being a 3-mana 2/3, probably not viable enough to see play in standard. Technically, you could curve this into something like a Krenko, but the fact that this is not a goblin doesn't really work too well with Krenko, other than giving it haste so that it can immediately tap. And in the past, there have been strategies where people play like a 2-drop that gives something haste. And so then they can go curve 3, give it haste, curve 4, give it haste. And then your opponent is annoyed at having annoyed at having these big threats that they would have normally, been able to interact with at sorcery speed. They're having to deal with them at instant speed somehow, and then have to spend removal on the otherwise innocuous 2-drop that hasn't attacked them. Is just giving things haste. At 3 mana, that's a little on the expensive side, so I don't really see this seeing a ton of play. It is an artifact creature, so there could be some synergies going on there. It is also a scout, so it has synergy with Vaughn from the Final Fantasy set, but if this is going to see play, it's going to see play for the same reason that Full Bore sees play, as a way to give warped things haste. And definitely is something that you should keep an eye on in Limited. Litho Breaking for 2 and a red. You have an instant at uncommon. Create a lander token, then you may sacrifice an artifact. When you do, Litho Breaking deals 2 damage to each creature. Kind of an interesting card. We have Literal Pyroclasm in standard right now, and that sees some sideboard play. We also have Fire Magic in standard right now, which even sees some main deck play. Which, if you cast the Fyra, the level 2 version of Fire Magic, does the exact same thing as this, except you're not required to sacrifice anything. This gives its own fodder, and there's no way for your opponent to interact with the fodder during the resolution of this spell. So the only time that my understanding of the way that this would work is you would cast Litho Breaking. It goes onto the stack. If your opponent doesn't counter the Litho Breaking, it creates a lander token, then gives you the opportunity to sacrifice something. You sacrifice an artifact, which could be the lander token. Then a new trigger enters the stack, which says, when this trigger resolves, deal 2 damage to each creature. So that new trigger does put something onto the stack at that point, but you've already made the sacrifice. So there's no way for, if you really just want to have this instant speed 2 damage sweeper through this card, then they'll have to counter it in order to stop it. And interestingly, if you have other artifacts, then you can leave the lander, sacrifice something else, and then you have this lander in play that you could possibly use in some sort of ramp strategy. Or like a teamer ramp deck often is not impacting the board significantly on many turns, so if you are able to put other fodder on here, then giving yourself this a rampant growth, a Wayfarer's Bauble, etc. onto the board just helps your strategy. I think for the most part, Fire Magic, because you can just cast it for 1 red to sweep away 1/1s or 1 toughness creatures, is going to be better than this card. But there would be, you know, if you have any sort of artifact sacrifice synergy, if you have any reason to ramp with these lander tokens, if you have any artifact synergy, you can in a pinch just cast this to create a lander token at instant speed. There's a world where you would play something like this. I think for the most part, just play Fire Magic if you don't have any of that synergy going on. Next up is Melded Moxite for 1 and a red. We have an artifact at common. When this artifact enters, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards, and then for 3 generic, sacrifice this. You can create a tapped 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. We talked about this when we were talking about the black cards. There is the 3 mana black spell, black sorcery that has an additional cost of sacrifice a creature or artifact, and then if you do, you get to reanimate a creature with mana value 5 or less, creature or spacecraft with mana value 5 or less. This curves perfectly into that. We were talking about I think it's called like Saheeli's Lattice from LCI. This is just another option as an artifact that Tormenting Voices to allow you to dump the reanimation target into the graveyard. My idea is a Kefka deck, a Grixis deck. You dump it into the graveyard with something like Melded Moxite. You then play that 3 mana reanimation to bring Kefka back onto the battlefield, and Kefka is just a very, very powerful card, especially if you can get it out on turn 3. So definitely a brew going on there. I think outside of that, this is perfectly fine in any sort of reanimator strategy. I think it's probably you'd start with things like Fear of Missing Out for a 2-drop, and even Overlord of the Baelmerk before you go to Melded Moxite. But there's an argument for just playing this in some sort of reanimator strategy as well. Next up is Memorial Vault for 3 and a red. We have an artifact at rare. It has tap, sacrifice another artifact, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is 1 plus the mana value of the sacrificed artifact. You may play those cards this turn. Interesting card that I don't really think plays that well. It is 1 plus the mana value of the sacrificed artifact. So if you have tokens laying around you know, map tokens, lander tokens, clue tokens, whatever, then you sacrifice them to the Memorial Vault, you're just impulse drawing the top card of your library in that scenario. But you don't get access to this, even though you can activate this at instant speed, you don't get access to that card until the end of your next turn. You only get access to the card on the turn that you activated this. So you can't really use this as just like weird red based card draw. Like, you can't use this in the same way that you would use Quarry Mountain Monastery. I play a Mardu control deck when I get annoyed at people on ladder, which is just kill everything, interact with your nuke graveyards, just grind you to death, and I'll eventually kill you via inevitable defeat, damage, or lightning bolts, or unholy annexes. But my card advantages in that deck is either through unholy annex or through Quarry Mountain Monasteries. And with Quarry Mountain Monastery, you can just hold up your mana, tap the Quarry Mountain Monastery on your opponent's end step, and have access to that card on your next turn. Here, you're not able to use this really in a control deck, and you have to somehow be constantly generating this fodder. Not really a constructed card, I don't think. Even if you are like blowing up real artifacts that you spent actual mana on, you ramped into something, and then, hey, I need to break this Hedron Archive, or I need to break this Iron Crag because I no longer need it, but I need to find something. It's not like you get to play these cards for free, so it lets you dig for something. But if you're, depending on what you're blowing up, you know, you may get access to one of them, maybe two of them, probably best case scenario 3 of them, a land drop, and then maybe double spell. But the rest of it just goes away. So I don't really see this card being constructed viable. Molecular Modifier. For 2 and a red, we have a creature, Kavu Artificer. At uncommon, it is a 2/2 with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. Pretty terrifying and limited. Makes it so that creature combat is absolutely miserable for your opponent, because you're always just giving your best thing or most opportune thing first strike, and so they're either having to chump, or, you know, obviously if they have something too big, then what are you going to do? But, you know, you're making combat very awkward for your opponent unless you're super far behind, and then they'll eventually not be able. They're either having to just chump, or they're having to just take it, and they can't just take the damage forever. So this is a fine limited card. The stat line for the mana value is too much for anything in constructed. So next is Nebula Dragon. For 6 and a red, we have a creature, Dragon, at uncommon. It is a 4/4 flyer that ETBs and deals 3 damage to any target. Interesting that we have a Eastern Dragon here. I mean, it's a limited card. It's super expensive for a 4/4. It's not even like a Volcanic Dragon, which is like a 6 mana 4/4 with haste. Sure, this ETBs and deals 3 damage to any target. Typically in limited, you're going to be using this to clean up the board a little bit, but you can obviously just go face if you want, which is super nice, but not going to see constructed play. Orbital Plunge for 3 in a red. We have a sorcery at common. Orbital Plunge deals 6 damage to target creature. If excess damage was dealt this way, create a lander token. More limited removal. 6 mana or 6 damage for 4 mana at sorcery speed. Like, sure, it can hit like the craziest things that your opponent might have, but 4 mana is so expensive for something that you might want to play in constructed. If you're really like, if you're having to put this into like your sideboard, because then in like your aggressive red deck, then I think you're probably just misunderstanding your game plan. You really want to just kill them already by the time this hits something like an Archfiend of the Dross, but Archfiend of the Dross is rotating. I'm trying to think of there's Desecration Demon. Is there anything else that is 6 toughness at 4 mana that sees play right now? And I can't think of anything. This doesn't kill Meringue River Regent that has 7 toughness. Yeah, no, I don't really see a world where you would put this into your main. So, not even main, where you put this into a competitive constructed deck. So, Oreplate Pangolin for 1 on a red. We have an artifact creature, Robot Pangolin, at common. It is a 2/2 with whenever another artifact you control enters, you may pay 1 generic. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It says another artifact, not itself, even though it itself is an artifact. But you know, for a limited, it doesn't say non-token. So if you're creating lander tokens, if you're creating other artifact tokens, if you're just playing artifact creatures, then if you just have a couple copies of this, then they sort of feed off of each other. Turn 2 this, turn 3 another one of these. Use the 1 excess mana to make the first one a 3/3 attack with it. Perfectly fine and limited. If you're aggressive, I could see just picking up as many copies of this card as you can because it's common, and just trying to go at it. So, Rig for War, 1 on a red. We have an instant at common. Target creature gets +3/+0 and gains first strike and reach until end of turn. Limited combat trick. 2 mana for this effect. Not going to see constructed play. Haven't really seen haste magic see constructed play. And haste magic is generally, I think, better than this, because for the types of decks that have been playing pump spells, because they don't really care. Those types of decks generally aren't caring about the health of the creature that they have. They're not trying to win in combat. They're just trying to kill you, and first strike is not that important if you're just trying to go face. So, Slag Drill Scrapper for a single red. We have an artifact creature, Robot Scout, at common. It is a 1/2 with an activated ability of 2 tap, sacrifice another artifact or land, draw a card. Mostly, I mean, it's a limited card. Any 1 mana creature, artifact creature, there's a world where it could see play in constructed. If there is some sort of artifact aggro deck going on, in that world, you're almost always just ignoring the activated ability. But you know, if things go super bad, then having a way to turn your artifact tokens into actual cards is fine. don't really see you ever sacrificing lands unless you're super, super desperate, or just are so close to being able to kill your opponent and just looking for one particular card, and it doesn't matter how hard you need to find it. But yeah, fringe constructed playability if there is some sort of artifact aggro deck. If there's not, nah. Tanook, Steadfast second. For 2 red, we get a legendary creature, Kavu Pilot, at Mythic. It is a 3/5 with other creatures you control have haste, and artifact cards and red creature cards in your hand have warp for 2 and a red. So this is the first time that we get to read warp on the stream today, though there have been many references to it. So what warp is cards in your hand have the ability to be cast for a warp cost, denoted by the mana cost next to the word warp. Those cards enter the battlefield, exist on the battlefield until the end step, and then the delay trigger that's set up by casting it for its warp cost goes onto the stack. You then have to exile that permanent as a result of that trigger, and then it goes into the exile zone that you have access to cast for its regular casting cost later. So if you've played Magic in the past, it's very similar to an effect called Evoke, where you sort of you're paying a cheaper cost for this card in order to gain access to. For Evoke, it was typically an enter the battlefield trigger, and then it would immediately get sacrificed. So you're just getting access to the enter the battlefield trigger early. For Warp, it's possibly enter the battlefield triggers, possibly leave the battlefield triggers, possibly the static that the card has. And then rather than go to your graveyard, it goes to exile, and you can just cast it again later for its regular cost. So I think generally stronger than Evoke. The cards themselves might not be stronger than Evoke, but I think the overall mechanic seems a little stronger than Evoke. Other thing to note, if your opponent, because the card that is getting warped exists on the battlefield as a game object, either as a creature or as an artifact or enchantment, some sort of permanent, I don't think that given the way that it's written, there's no non-permanent spells that have warp. If your opponent removes that game object, that permanent, before the delay trigger happens, then you are not it goes to the graveyard, or even if they exile it, it goes to just normal exile, and you do not gain access to cast it later, because the delay exile trigger is the thing that gives you the opportunity to pay to cast it from exile later. So keep that in mind. If you're generally, the effects of a warp card are the same whether you cast it for its warp or not. But there are some cards, there's a white card, a white angel, that care specifically about how much mana you spent on it, and if you really need the big effect, it might not, putting it into harm's way for its warp cost might not be beneficial to you, because then your opponent has the opportunity to get rid of it. Regardless, I think this card's pretty cracked. 4 mana for 3/5, not the worst stats in the world. But giving your other creatures haste. Most importantly, it's giving your warp cards haste. We just talked about with Full Bore and with the 3-drop that you can tap to give a creature haste. You're giving your cards that have warp on them already the ability to smash in when they were just warped, which they normally wouldn't be able to. As well, this is letting you cheat out artifact cards or red creature cards. So I didn't really look at the full list of like big red cards, big red creatures. There's things like Terror of the Peaks that's still going to be in standard post rotation. There's things like Clive that is pretty cracked, getting warped in. There's I was gonna say like there's the Overlord, the Red Overlord, but like if you go like to Nook into the Red Overlord, you reduce its mana cost by 1, and I guess you get to actually crack in with it. But you already have the ability to impinge with it. What's another big red thing in standard? Itali is rotating. The other Itali, the weaker Itali, I think is in Foundations. So that's going to be there. But I'm sure you can find plenty of different things. And then for artifact cards, Portal to Phyrexia is rotating. Trying to think of big artifacts that you might... Chimmel, getting Chimmel in for only 3. You kind of just get a single Discover 5. There's the End Stone, which we saw last time, which I think was like 7 mana. It's artifact cards, not colorless cards, so you can't cheat out an Ugin with something like this. You also can't cheat out something like an Ultima, the creature Ultima, with something like this. But again, just do a Scryfall search for artifact cards and red creature cards of, you know, typically you'd think mana value 6 or greater, because you think I go turn 4 this, turn 5 warp in 2 things. Sorry, not 2 things. Turn 5 warp in 1 thing. Turn 6 warp in 2 things. Stuff like that. And especially if you're doing like some sort of big red thing where you can get to 6, where you have 6 mana the turn after you play Tanuk, and you can do 2 warps in at once, then that can be absolutely correct. If you're just looking for other creatures you control have haste, I think there are better options for that. If you're specifically in Goblins, you've got the Howl Squad Heavy. There's the blue-red Siege from Tarkir Dragonstorm out there. So I think you'd really want to be using this warp stuff. But I think it's a very, very powerful card. Something that I'm definitely going to try to brew around. Territorial Bruntar is our next one up. 4 red for a creature beast at uncommon. It is a 6/6 with reach. In landfall, whenever a land you control enters, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card this turn. Too expensive for standard, I think, but a pretty powerful big red thing for limited. Landfall essentially draw a card and guaranteed to draw a non-land. Should note, good thing I reread it. It is not written in the way that Cascade is written. you are exiling cards from the top of your library. So you're clearing out lands, but so you may or may not be fine with that, depending on, you know, how much landfall synergy that you actually have outside of just this guy. But the other thing to note is this could deck you very, very quickly. I mean, there could be a literal scenario where a very, very low one where you play this card, you play a land, and the only things you have left in your deck are lands, and you just deck yourself, and then if you don't win on that attack, you die to mill, because it doesn't put the exiled cards back onto the bottom of your library. So just keep that in mind. That is sort of interesting. I think it's too expensive if you're trying to do some kind of Labman thing. Like, you could theoretically go Lab Maniac on one turn. Oh, but it has to be, never mind. It's a different way about it. It's the opposite way. I was thinking that it was going to be like a, what's the combo kill in Modern, Goblin, not Bombardment. The Goblin thing that you Ironcrag feet into in order to mill through your entire deck until you find a land. You don't have any actual lands. This is the opposite. So you can't really do a Labman thing here unless you're like super, super lucky. But yeah, I think the biggest thing to note on here is that the exiled cards, the lands that you have to exile until you hit the non-land, do not go back on the bottom of your library. In Constructed, often that's not going to be that big of a deal. Even in Limited, that's not going to be that big of a deal, but you are a little bit more susceptible to dying to decking yourself with a card like this. Vault Guard Trooper. For 4 and a red, we have a creature Kavu Soldier at uncommon. It is a 5/5 that has at the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. Obviously a pretty good top end for an aggressive red deck in Limited. You're just swinging away. You've dumped your hand. Your last card is this. You swing to attack. In step. Even if this isn't your last card, if your last cards are just like lands or things that you don't care about, you dump it, rebuild. Obviously, if you have no cards in hand, sure, I'll discard my empty hand to draw 2. That's fine. So pretty good aggressive top end, 5 mana, 5/5, a decent limited stat line. Not really going to see constructed play, but yeah. Zookeeper Mechan. For 1 and a red, we have an artifact creature robot at common. It is a 1/3 with tap, add a red. So this is our second 2 mana red mana dork that we have. There's the monk from Tarkir Dragonstorm that you can tap for red, and it's at 2 mana. And then you have this, same thing. So big red having access to like 12 2 mana mana dorks and mana rocks. You've got your Ironcrag feats, you've got this, and you've got the monk from Tarkir Dragonstorm. Interesting to keep a note on. And then for 6 and a red, target creature you control gets +4/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. For the most part, that's just irrelevant text. It's nice to have in the late game, especially in limited, as a way to just start pumping up a flyer or something that might be unblockable or whatever to end the game, close out a board stall, stuff like that. This is an artifact creature, so if you're doing any sort of like artifact rampy stuff, that this is something to keep in mind. I mean, this is borderline playable in standard for like a big red deck specifically, or artifact ramp. So yeah, interesting card. On to green. First green card from the second week of spoilers. Atmospheric Greenhouse. For 4 and a green, we have an artifact spacecraft at uncommon. When it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And it has station. This is the first time that we've seen station this stream, I believe. I don't think we saw anything with station in red, so that we've mentioned spacecraft during this stream before. So station is similar to crew, but different in a lot of important ways. It gives this artifact the ability to tap another creature that you control to put charge counters equal to the tapped creature's power onto this spacecraft. You can only station at sorcery speed, and for the reminder text on here, it says it's an artifact creature at 8+. Not all spacecraft become artifact creatures at 8+ charge counters. It's all reliant on whatever it says on the card. For this one in particular, you look on the card, it says at 8+. The 8 in the circle is, hey, when I've reached 8 charge counters, I unlock this, which is turning it into a 5/4 flying trample creature, artifact creature. One thing to note, when it enters, it puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, unless it somehow was able to enter with 8 charge counters on it. It is not a creature when it enters the battlefield, or if it somehow got reanimated and became a creature from some other way than by stationing it up, then it would not put a +1/+1 counter on itself. So even when it does turn into a creature, it's still just a 5/4. It's not a 6/5. My overall thoughts on spacecraft and the station as a mechanic, I went into it pretty extensively on the very first stream that I did 2 Thursdays ago, where was not a big fan at all of this mechanic. Stationing only at sorcery speed means that you're leaving yourself wide open to your opponent's attacks. Sure, you're able to station things or use creatures that enter the battlefield this turn to station, in the same way that you can use creatures that enter the battlefield this turn to crew a vehicle, but when you're crewing a vehicle, unless you're dumbly doing it on the same turn that you played the vehicle, you're doing that. You've made the conscious choice to attack, unless the thing that you use to station put enough charge counters onto the spacecraft to turn it into a creature. You're not able to attack with this. And in general, like, you're going to go turn 5 this, and then the more a spacecraft costs, the more likely that you're able to turn it on sooner because you've probably played more creatures, but like trying to like curve fill with station is, it just doesn't really work. You're either not attacking your opponent with the creatures that you already had on the battlefield that could have attacked, or you're leaving yourself super vulnerable and may or may not have even put enough charge counters onto the spacecraft or planet in order to make it so that it's a blocker for your opponent's attack, or turn it on to be an attacker, or even turn it on to get some other ability that it might have. So I'm not a big fan of this mechanic at all. I think that there may be like 1 or 2 cards with station that are playable, but I think this is primarily a limited mechanic, and I don't even really know how good it's going to be in limited unless like everyone has to be stationing and playing spacecraft. Next up is Biosynthetic Burst. For 1 on a green, we have an instant at common. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. It gains reach, trample, and indestructible until end of turn, and untap it. A limited protection spell for the most part. You can use it for like all sorts of things because it's giving it trample. You can use this offensively if you really want, if you really need to, if doing so would cause you to win the game, to trample over something of your opponent's. But I think in general, given that you're giving reach, and given that you're giving indestructible to something, and given that you're untapping it, you're most likely using this defensively or in response to removal. Defensively in that you made your attack first, your opponent thinks that the way is clear, so they try to swing back at you. You Biosynthetic Burst, untap your biggest thing, make it bigger, make it indestructible, eat the best thing that creature can eat, and blow your opponent out. For constructed, I think the card Overprotect is almost certainly better. There's a world where I'm trying to think of the world where this sees play. There's the mono green Tifa landfall decks, where putting a +1/+1 counter onto I think it's called Mossborn Hydra is nice because every time you landfall, it doubles the amount of counters on it, and so you're adding a counter early to it so that it can grow exponentially faster. But for Tifa herself, Overprotect gives +3/+3 in addition to trample and indestructible. And Tifa just cares about her power rather than the number of counters on her. So I think if you are playing a 2-mana protection spell, you're just gonna play Overprotect. For 1 mana, you've got Snakeskin Veil, which basically, it doesn't give indestructible, but it does a lot of the same things. It gives Hexproof, which most of the time does the same thing. Maybe Fringe play as a sideboard card against like sweepers for your mono green landfall deck, but I think if you're playing something main deck, you're probably just playing Overprotect. Blooming Stinger. For 1 and a green, we have a creature plant Scorpion at common. It is a 2/2 with Death Touch, and then when this creature enters, another target creature you control gains Death Touch until end of turn. For you, There's a different word that I want to use, but I'm not going to. For folks that enjoy Finn the Fangbearer stuff, like, sure, giving something that doesn't have death touch for a turn, like maybe I've got some poison stuff going on here. They even got the whole poison drop or venom drop, whichever one pedantics you pedants want to correct me on which one it is. So you have some stuff like that. Almost certainly just a limited card. And really you want your, you know, low curve death touch creature to be at 1 mana. 2 mana, it's fine, but it's not incredible. And ETB give death touch, really that's mostly ETB gives something unblockable for a turn. Especially if it's small, give something small unblockable for a turn, and generally that's not that powerful. If you're giving something big death touch, then your opponent can just chump it, which isn't going to be much different than if it didn't have death touch. So yeah, just all right and limited, I think. Close Encounter. For 1 and a green, we have an instant at uncommon. As an initial cost to cast this spell, choose a creature you control or a warped creature card you own in exile. Close Encounter deals damage equal to the power of the chosen creature or the card to target creature. This is a very interesting bite style effect, or punch in this case, going toward the savage punch, even trying to reference it in the art. Also very interesting, there's a couple things to note on here. One, the obvious thing to note is if you don't have anything on the battlefield but you have creatures in warp, you can still use this as removal. 2, unlike a lot of like Rabid Bite style effects where it's like target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. This is, you're making your choice as a cost of the spell, and it doesn't say target at any point, so there's no way for your opponent to remove your creature in response to you casting Close Encounter. Obviously they can't really remove it if it's in warp outside of very fringe effects that are only in this set. But even if it's on the battlefield, yeah, even if it's on the battlefield, they can't really interact in that way. And am I misremembering how Rabid Bite works? Let me look that up before I make a statement that is wrong. Let me look up Rabid Bite. Rabid Bite. Yeah. If either creature is an illegal target as Rabid Bite tries to resolve, the creature you control won't deal damage. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Here, the way that this is written is you've made your choice as a cost of the spell, as a cost of casting the spell, which probably has to do with the fact that can't really target, or the mechanics of trying to like target a creature card in exile is weird. But even then, I feel like the way that this is written is, even if your opponent, if you chose a creature on the battlefield and your opponent removed it, it would remember the power that the chosen creature had prior to getting removed and still deal the damage. This will be something that I'll have to look for in the pre-release notes to see if that's true, because this is written differently enough that I'm not sure how it works. Obviously, for the warped side, that's how it works, because the card doesn't technically have a power, because it doesn't. It's a creature card. It doesn't exist on the battlefield yet, or it doesn't have a character. Maybe it does. I don't know. A judge can get through that. My main question is, because of the way that this is written, if they removed the creature that you controlled, would it deal damage? Even if this doesn't say, often the way that when you have like these choose a things, your opponent's not able to know, but you've had to make the choice of a creature as the cost of the spell. So I think your opponent would know, because you had to make that choice in order to get it onto the stack. So I don't think that sort of rules lawyering matters in this scenario. It's just whether or not it would remember the power of the chosen creature when you, even if it was removed, if you chose something that's actually on the battlefield. Something to look forward to in the pre-release notes. Next up is Diplomatic Relations. For 2 and a green, we have an instant at common. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Vigilance until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. So, you gotta read this card carefully. To get why people are talking about this card, this is one of the few cards from the second half of the second week of spoilers that I did see some talk about. As it is written, I can, if I have no creatures on the battlefield and my opponent has one creature that has at most 1 extra toughness than power, or if it has more but it has death touch, then this, I can target that creature to give it +1/+0 and gain Vigilance, and then have it deal damage to itself equal to its power. So as long as it didn't have 2 or greater toughness than its power, upon resolution of this, it just dies. So it's mono green murder at common. Murder is not like a hugely constructed playable card, but green typically does not get a way to kill things at instant speed without also having a creature on the battlefield, because they typically get effects like we just saw with Close Encounter or whatever it was called, or Rabid Bite, where it's, I have a creature and it's going to fight the opponent's creature, or it's going to deal damage equal to its power to the opponent's creature. Here, you don't even have to have anything. Your opponent, it's, you know, in many scenarios, it's just an easier to cast mono green murder. So this is another card that'll be interesting to look at the pre-release notes for, to see if what they meant was target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains vigilance until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. That seems more within the color pie of green than what this card is. Even if, like, you can even argue theoretically that if it read target creature gets +1/+0 and gains vigilance until end of turn, it deals damage equal to its power to another target creature an opponent controls. Even then, like, you could argue that that's within our understanding of the green color pie. Because you're like forcing two creatures to fight each other or hurt each other, even if they're not one of yours and one of theirs. It's still, there has to be some creature thing going on here. The way that the art is depicting, the way that green's supposed to work, this isn't really the way that the card, it's called diplomatic relations, so there's supposed to be like two different bodies having a conversation, whether it's tongue-in-cheek like the art is saying. It's not really saying, hey, this thing is punching itself in the face and killing itself. Anyways. Drix Fate Maker. For 3 and a green, we have a creature, Drix Wizard. At common, it is a 3/2 with, when this creature enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample, and it has warp of 1 and a green. Fine limited card, you know, well, an okay limited card. 2 mana to give a single creature a +1/+1 counter is not something that's playable, but and the way that it works, like, it's not really something that you're going to be doing like as a curve filler, because unless you specifically have a 1-drop, technically you can put the +1/+1 counter on itself, but if you cast it for its warp, then it's going to exile and that +1/+1 counter went away, so that's not really that useful. So, you know, giving everything that you have that has +1/+1 counters on it trample, that obviously can be powerful in some sort of counter strategy. I just think the warp, if this was like 1 mana and you can fill it in along the curve a little easier, but mostly having to wait for 4 mana to really get this, or wait for like 4 mana to do a 2-drop plus this, or just play this at 4 and get a 4 mana 4/3 with trample. I don't know. It's probably fine and limited, not constructed playable, but I also am not sure about its limited viability. Edge Rover. For single green, we have an artifact creature, Robot Scout. At uncommon, it is a 2/2 with reach that says when this creature dies, each player creates a lander token. I think this is a pretty good aggressive green 1-drop. A 1 mana 2/2, pretty above rate. The fact that it's an artifact creature is also interesting. The fact that when it dies, it leaves behind a artifact token is interesting. You are giving your opponent something, so it's kind of harkens back to how they used to do 1-drops, you know, overstated 1-drops, where it's like, oh, there's like a theoretically huge downside, like a Goblin Guide or something like that. where, okay, you gave your opponent something for literally free. But if they don't have a way to use the lander token, they can obviously use the lander token as a Wayfarer's Bauble. But if that's what they're using it for, maybe they can just find a point on the curve where they can use it. But if you're being aggressive enough, then you're not really giving them the time to take off to do the lander token thing. So you're curving this into the green drop that we saw from last Friday's stream, or you're doing this plus Wildfire Wickerfolk, and then you have some sort of artifact creature synergy. This might all, like, I'm trying to think, is this even potentially better than Patchwork Beastie in some sort of Gruul Delirium list, because it's both an artifact creature, so it works with helping you get Delirium, but also doesn't have to go through any hoops in order to just start attacking. It's 1 power less than what you had to do to get Patchwork Beastie going, but maybe just the ability to immediately start attacking might be good enough. So yeah, I think this is a fine, playable 1-drop for standard. Imidian Terrabotanist. For 1 and a green, we have a creature insect druid at uncommon. It is a 2/3 with landfall. When a land you control enters, you gain 1 life. Seen a lot of this type of landfall effect over the years. There's like Jodi offshoot from like Ikoria and stuff like that. This is significantly better body. A 2-mana 2/3 is totally fine for a body. The effect is not really, aggressive enough, but I could easily see this be a sideboard card if you are doing any sort of landfall stuff and you want a way to survive through an aggressive, a red deck. You have this you're playing like a Tifa deck or whatever. I could easily see you bringing in a copy of this, or maybe not a Tifa deck, but maybe like a Selesnya ramp or a Teamer ramp deck that is just going to get hit a bunch and just needs to survive long enough so that they can quickly swing the board back into their favor and win the game. Next up is a Gene Pollinator. For a single green, we have an artifact creature, Robot Insect, at common. It is a 1/2 with tap and untapped permanent you control. Add 1 mana of any color. Very interesting card. We have literal Llanowar Elves in standard, but beyond Llanowar Elves, there's, I think it's called Sentinel Stalwart from Ikoria, which is for 1 green. It's a 1/2 that's tap and untapped creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. There's Molt Tinder from Ether Drift, which is tap, exile a card from your graveyard, add 1 mana of any color. And then you can also tap it to mill a card. And then this. I think that this is significantly better, is just outside of any sort of elf synergy. This is just a better Sentinel Stalwart. Whether or not it's better than something like Molt Tinder really depends on your deck. If you're able to mill your deck, if you're doing a Insidious Root strategy, then obviously something like a Molt Tinder is going to be better in that deck than Gene Pollinator. But if you're doing like, if you're trying to do like if you're trying to do like a ramp strategy, if you've got a bunch of artifact tokens, or even if you're doing like, hey, I've got just some like random enchantment lying around. Maybe I'm going like Temur Dragons, and I've got Roiling Dragonstorms that I'm playing. I can tap those Roiling Dragonstorms as part of the activated ability of Gene Pollinator to get a mana of any color. If I've got an impended Overlord, I can tap those impended Overlords while they're still impending to use them for mana. So I think that this is pretty playable. It's especially playable if you have any sort of artifact synergy or care about any artifacts entering the battlefield. And it's not as good as Llanowar Elf, but it's fine. I could see it see play in standard. Germinating Worm for 4 and a green. We have a creature plant worm at common. It is a 5/5 that says when this creature enters, you gain 2 life, and it has a warp cost of 1 and a green. So this is the type of card that is very, very good. One, this is just a fine limited card, but this is a type that's very, very good with full bore. It's pretty good with something like the Tanuk, the mythic creature that we saw in red. Sure, this itself is not a red creature, but this already has warp. So 2 mana 5/5 ETBs, gain a life, Kraken for 5. This is fine with anything that you can do to give stuff like this haste is perfectly fine. It's borderline 2 mana 5/5, even without any sort of evasion, is obviously huge. It's going to go away, but if you're able to put haste onto the battlefield, if you're able to put static away to give haste, or a way to give this haste, cracking in for 5, if it's not able to be blocked, is perfectly fine. Constructed, wait, if you have to actually cast this for its regular cost, not the greatest, but you know, you're fine. Hold on, I've got a call coming, so give me a second. I need to go pick this up. Apologies for that. Parents are on a big road trip, and making sure that they aren't, you know, tired and go flat in the middle of nowhere or got into an accident or whatever. So yeah, needed to take that. But back to this. If you have a way to give this haste, 2 mana 5/5, even with no evasion, is a pretty big hitter. If you can't give it a haste, you're not really gonna play this card in competitive constructed, but a perfectly fine limited card. Glacier Godmaw for 5 green. We have a creature Leviathan at uncommon. It is a 6/6 with trample, so 7 mana 6/6 with trample. When this enters, you create a lander token, and then it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance and haste until end of turn. Ooh, excuse me. So, this is another way. You have to order it in the correct way, but this is another way to give your warp creatures haste. 7 mana is a little on these. I shouldn't say a little. Is way too expensive for standard play for something like this. But in limited, just remember that you can play this, untap next turn, warp out a bunch of things, play a land. All your creatures are all those warped creatures are a little bit bigger, and they can just crash in. Seems like an excellent finisher in limited, as long as the format allows you to go this deep. Next up is Ice Cave Crasher for 3 and a green. We have a creature beast at common. It is a 4/4 with trample. It also has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. 4 mana 4/4 trample, landfall, a little bit of a bump, lander tokens, perfectly fine and limited. Not much else to say here. Ice Till Explorer for 2 green. We have a creature Insect Scout at rare. It is a 2/4 that says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. You may play lands from your graveyard, and whenever a land you control enters, mill a card. A pretty powerful card, and reminds you of cards from the past. It's exploration. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. It is Crucible of Worlds. You may play lands from your graveyard, and it is a way to self-mill. So you can put. So if you mill a land into your graveyard, then you're essentially drawing that land, as long as Ice Till Explorer is still on the battlefield, because the next turn you can just play that land from your graveyard rather than have to have a land in your hand. The body is pretty weak from a constructed perspective, and having to wait all the way till ramp is powerful the earlier that you can do it. The reason that Llanowar Elves is such a powerful card is that it is a turn 1 mana dork. The same reason that Birds of Paradise is a powerful card. The reason that we don't really see rampant growth in standard anymore is having a, there's Glimpse the Core in standard, but that only gets forests, and that doesn't see a ton of play. But I think rampant growth would see a ton of play. One, because it mana fixes, and 2, it's also at 2 mana, and so this you're gonna have to wait till turn 4. Maybe if you ramp into this, you can do it on turn 3, but this to me is more for Commander, almost certainly more for Commander than for competitive constructed. Like, sure, there's some synergies. If you have sort of mass landfall, you can mass mill and then maybe mass landfall again. So you can kind of do like some loops with Aftermath Analyst or with like Lumra. So like possibly something going on with that and like your like your Lizard from Bloomburrow or your Sabotender. And we also saw another one that pinged on landfall in last stream. And so maybe in one of those decks, I know I said on the last week's set of spoilers that I was going to experiment with brewing around landfall combo again. Tried to do it in the beginning of Final Fantasy Standard with the printing of Sabotender, and was just getting killed by Corey Steelcutter on turn 3 and 4 over and over again. Can try it again with Icetill Explorer, but I think that this is definitely more of a Commander card than a 60 card constructed card. Intrepid Tenderfoot for 1 and a green. We have a creature insect citizen at common. It is a 2/2 that has, for 3 generic, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, activate only as a sorcery. It's fine. It's a bear. If you have nothing else to do, you can dump your mana in to grow it. You can only do it at sorcery speed, which is a little annoying. You would much rather be able to hold up mana for a counter or for removal, and then if your opponent doesn't do anything you deem worthy enough to use your instant speed interaction with, you just put it on, you just dump that mana into here. But it's fine. It's a 2-drop that can scale into the late game. Larval Scoutlander for 2 and a green. We have an artifact spacecraft at uncommon. When this spacecraft enters, you may sacrifice a land or lander. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So Springbloom Druid is in Foundations, which is this effect, except you don't have the or lander clause. And really, the or lander clause is the only thing that gives this card any juice over something like Springbloom Druid. If you have the ability to create a lander before you can play this card, and it has to specifically be a lander. If it said you may sacrifice a land or artifact token, land or artifact, then this would be insane. But if you have specifically the ability to create a lander token, then this is very, very good. If you just can only sacrifice a land, then this is fine, but you kind of already have this effect in Standard with Springbloom Druid as a way to really only end up +1 on lands, since you had to sacrifice a land in order to do it. If you can sacrifice a lander, then you're ending up +2 on lands, which typically costs 3 or 4 mana for explosive vegetation style effects. So there are ways at 1 mana and 2 mana to get a lander. There's a couple of green X cards, like insects, that ETB create a lander. There's the 1 mana green sorcery that gains 2 life, create a lander. So this is definitely one of the more playable spacecraft. I didn't even go so far as to talk about this has station, and it turns into an artifact creature at 7+ counters and becomes a flying 3/3, because I don't think anything else on this card matters. It's just, is this a spring? Can I make this better than Springbloom Druid? If I can, then this is very playable in standard. If I can't, then this is fine, but I would need some other synergy in order for me to be like, I need to play this over Springbloom Druid. Sure, this is kind of the, like, you can argue, well, you know, in the worst case scenario, with this, I can turn this into a 3/3 flyer. Well, I mean, the actual worst case scenario is I need to block, or I need to chump block, and Springbloom Druid can chump block, and this cannot unless you already turned it on. So, you know, it's not just like a strict upgrade to Springbloom Druid unless you can sacrifice the lander. Then you would almost always play this over Springbloom Druid. Lash Whip Predator. For 4 green, we have a creature plant beast at uncommon. It is a 5/7 with reach, and the spell costs 2 less to cast if your opponents control 3 or more creatures. So a 6-mana 5/7 with reach is fine-ish in standard. Not standard, in limited. Blocks for days. Decent enough body. Doesn't have trample, so it's not going to close the game out super fast after you played it. But if you can cast this for 4 because your opponent went super wide, this is really good, because it puts a huge stop sign in front of your opponent that they're going to have to search for removal, or just be fine with having their creature get eaten by this thing. So I think pretty good for a limited ramp strategy, or a limited controlling deck that's not going to play. Well, there's nothing about them having 3 or more creatures than you, so you can even have a bunch of creatures on the battlefield, but if your opponent has 3 or more creatures, then this gets the discount anyways. So yeah, I think this is a great card for limited. Loading Zone. For 3 and a green, we have an enchantment at rare. If 1 or more counters we put onto a creature, spacecraft, or planet you control, twice that many of each of those kinds of counters are put on it instead, and it has a warp cost of a single green. So a couple different ways to think about this card. You can think about it as a one-shot Hardened Scales-esque effect. It's a little bit better than Hardened Scales, in that Hardened Scales just adds an additional +1/+1 counter whenever you added a +1/+1 counter on something. Here you add twice as many, so this is closer to the counter side of Doubling Season. I forget what the ones that only care about counters are called. So from a standard perspective, you could think of it like that. And I'm mostly thinking about this from the warp cost, because that's where you would really do this in competitive constructed. Paying 4 mana for this, that's pretty slow to do. The other part that you would do this is what kind of it being depicted on here is, this is a way to much more quickly activate your spacecraft or your planets. You would really, that's a lot more of a deck building exercise than I can really go through just by, just off the dome looking at this card. but if you are able to very quickly turn on the green land that is a Gaia's Cradle, or very quickly turn on one of these like super powerful spacecraft, because you can start stationing and everything stations as if essentially as if they had twice the power that they had before, then this can be a very, very powerful effect. And this can be a way to make what I've mostly considered unplayable spacecraft and planets into actual playable cards. Now, if I have to play, the question always becomes when you make that statement, if I have to play some other card to make something that was otherwise unplayable playable, am I really doing anything? I don't know. I think for competitive constructed, unless there is some like absolutely overpowering combo with this, which is again a deck building exercise that you would have to go through, you would mostly see this in some sort of +1/+1 counters deck, some sort of hardens trying to use this like an Ozolith or a hardened scales, something like that. And for that, this is fine. It doesn't stick around forever like a hardened scales would, but it's fine. And then I leave that as an exercise to the watcher to try and break the other half of loading zone, the station half of loading zone. Melt Strider's Gear. For a single green, we have an artifact equipment at common. When it enters, attached to a creature you control. Target creature gets +2/+1 and has reach, and then otherwise has an equip cost of 5. No flash on this, but +2/+1 is fine. Giving something reach is okay-ish. Mostly limited, I would believe. If whatever creature initially has this dies, you're very unlikely to ever put this on anything else. So you're really thinking this is just sort of an aura more than an equipment, but there's worlds where the game went on super, super long and you have nothing else to do. For constructed, I think you would rather have like Coral Sword or there's I think it had Flash, the white version of Coral Sword that we talked about in a previous stream, more than something like this. But yeah, not much else to say. Melt Strider's Resolve, and sorry about the quality on here. This is what it was when I pulled it off of Scryfall. Melt Strider's Resolve. For a single green, we have an enchantment aura at uncommon. So enchant creature you control. When it enters, enchanted creature fights up to one target creature an opponent controls, and enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and can't be blocked by more than one creature. Interesting-ish card. In constructed, I think the sort of fringe boggles deck that was playing like Calyx and Tomical Honor Guard and stuff like that goes away, because both Calyx and Tomical Honor Guard rotate. You still have Toadstool Admirer, you still have things like Armored Armadillo, stuff like that. But without Calyx, you're losing a ton of power in that deck. I think in older formats, like Light Paws stuff, maybe you could do something like this, because it is both a 1-mana enchantment that forces a fight, and it's giving you a little bit extra toughness so that you're more likely to survive that fight even if this is like the first enchantment that you put onto your Boggles creature. So lets you get on through. And then like one of the ways that an opponent can deal with a boggled up creature is, you know, mass blocking it to get enough power to trade, and this just makes it so that that can't happen. So yeah, I think it's a pretty playable card. I don't really think in standard it's terribly playable, because, well, like maybe there's still optimistic scavenger stuff floating around, so maybe as a way to both trigger Eerie and fight something, you can maybe see this see play in standard. In other formats, in older formats that have much more Boggle synergy stuff, I could definitely see this see play. And then in limited, you're mostly just considering this as a 1 mana green removal spell, which is perfectly fine. Hole Through the Weft. For 3 green, we have a sorcery at uncommon. It says return up to 2 target non-land permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand, then return up to 2 target land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Pretty interesting card. I think you need to be pretty heavily into self-mill, because you have to get full advantage of this card. You have to have at least 4 cards in your graveyard, and 2 of them have to be non-land permanents, 2 of them have to be lands. So you're gonna need to be heavy self-mill or playing a lot of fetch lands, which outside of like Tifa landfall stuff, the only really playable fetch land is Fabled Passage. That's why I think that you need to be more self-mill. But if you're able to, you know, put the pieces of the puzzle together, this is double regrowth plus ramping twice. And doesn't say anything about them having to be basic lands. So if you are playing fetch lands, you can get back the land that you fetched. Or not the land that you fetched, the fetched land, to then go again. It's going to enter tapped, so you can't immediately crack it, but if we're explicitly talking about Fabled Passage, by the time that you're casting this, the basic land that you find would enter in untapped. I think it's a fine card. I think you're probably not playing it in the main. I think this is more close to a sideboard card, where you would sideboard it in against a, you know, a mid-range removal heavy strategy that, so you can pull through the weft to act as a little bit of card advantage, and you're probably already a ramp strategy, so being able to still get your ramp on is fine. You're not really getting a ton of value from this ramp outside of just having overwhelmingly more mana than your opponent to start double spelling, but you're not really getting like super ahead. With this, I don't know, seems good to me. Seedship Agrarian. For 3 and a green, we have a creature insect scientist at uncommon. It is a 3/3 with whenever this creature becomes tapped, create a lander token. And then landfall, whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So if you're attacking, you spit out lander tokens. If you're using this to station up a spacecraft, spit out lander tokens. And then it grows so that it can more quickly turn on spacecraft. You can also use those lander tokens in order to make this grow faster, to more quickly turn on spacecraft. Very synergistic with spacecraft stuff. 4 mana is too expensive for standard, but seems great in limited. Sky Stinger for 2 and a green. We have a creature insect warrior at common. It is a 3/3 with reach, and whenever this creature blocks a creature with flying, it gets +5/+0 until end of turn. So going to trade with nearly anything that your opponent is trying to fly over with. And worst case is a 3 mana 3/3, which is, you know, a decent-ish stat line for limited. Sledge class speed ship for 2 and a green. We have an artifact spacecraft at rare. It has station, and then at 7 charge counters, it turns into a 4/5 flyer with whenever the spacecraft attacks, you put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Sure, this technically only costs 3, and if you have some way, well, that's not even true. I was going to say, if you have some way to animate this creature beyond turning it on by its own spacecraft ability, then maybe you're cooking, but the whole Elvish Piper style effect, the whole Kona style effect on it, isn't even on the card until you actually put 7+ counters onto it. So you can't like Zoetic Glyph this and then start attacking and immediately dumping like Bahamut's and whatever onto the battlefield. There's like 30,000 different versions of this Elvish Piper style effect even in standard right now. Smuggler's Surprise, there's Kona, there's Summoner's Grimoire. There's so many ways to do this so much better. Like, cards like this are why I'm so down on station as a mechanic, because you're having to jump through all of these hoops to get something that is significantly worse than cards that already exist. Thawbringer for 2 and a green. We have a creature insect scout. So many scouts. Vaughn Stalks Rising. An insect scout at common. It is a 4/2 that has, when the creature enters or dies, surveil 1. It's fine. 3 mana 4/2. Attacks well. Sculpts the top of your deck. Even if it's forced to trade, lets you sculpt the top of your deck. Perfectly fine card. Now we're on to our multicolored, and give me just a second. Gotta check something real quick. I'll be right back with you. Alrighty. Halia Ascendant Cadet. For 2 green, white, white, we have a legendary creature, Human Soldier, at uncommon. She is a 3/3 with whenever Halia enters or attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and whenever one or more creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So we talked about this briefly when we were looking last week's spoilers. They've done this before where this is the same character that we've seen in other cards, except she appears as like an uncommon version and then like a rare or a mythic version elsewhere. This is the same character that was the Soul Sister that also was the Gaffer. So Soul Sister meaning that when it or other creatures entered the battlefield, you gained 1 life, and then the Gaffer meaning when on your end step, if you gained 3 or more life, you drew a card. This is the exact same character, except it's an uncommon version. And I think we've seen as well, there have been other creatures that had other legendary creatures that have multiple representations that came in as a 5-drop, though I don't think that's that holds all over the place in the set. As far as this creature goes, 5 mana for a 3/3. You could put the +1/+1 counter on itself, so 5 mana for a 4/4. It does have an attack trigger, so as it starts attacking, you could just keep putting the counters on itself to keep growing it. And then it does have a little bit of card draw, but it has the bad version of the bad wording of this effect, where it's 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to a player, meaning that if you have multiple creatures that deal combat damage to a player with multiple creatures with +1/+1 counters on them that deal combat damage to a single player, then you would still only draw 1 card. In Commander, if you attacked 3 different opponents with creatures with +1/+1 counters on them and they all made contact, then you would draw 3 cards. But again, mostly evaluating this from 1v1 competitive 60 card constructed. This is just a far worse version of this type of effect than something like an Enduring Curiosity. I think all that together just puts this as unplayable. You need much more out of your 5-drop than something like this. A Mimnon, Uthros Exile. This is another creature that has had multiple representations in the set. For 1 blue and a red, we have a legendary creature, Jellyfish Advisor, at uncommon. It is a 1/3 with flying, and whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. This one's a lot closer to constructed playable. It doesn't say non-token, so if you are able to spit out a bunch of token artifacts, or even just play cheap artifact creatures or cheap artifacts, you can really start building up. The body itself is pretty weak, and this is sort of one of those things where it's like, if I untap with this, then I can do a bunch of cool stuff. I think its biggest issue is that it is the same mana cost as Vivi, and gonna be very hard. You're gonna have to be very, very convincing for why I would want, if I am in the Izzet colors, why I would want to do anything other than just try and play the best version of a Vivi deck. So I think that's its worst, the biggest problem of this card. But I think it's an interesting build around, and I think it's going to work very well in limited. with all the lander tokens that are getting generated, all of the artifact creatures that are out there, can make combat terrifying for you. And the fact that you can put the counters onto itself, it doesn't say put it onto another creature, means that worst case scenario, if the ground is still super gummed up, you can just start pumping this guy up and getting in with this as a flyer. So yeah, I think a pretty good card in limited. Could see standard play if there wasn't already something significantly better at its exact mana cost. Pinnacle Emissary, for the same mana cost that we just saw, one a blue and a red. Also, other thing to talk about with that card, it's legendary, so you can't have multiple of them out. It would be so much better if it was non-legendary, because then you could really start popping off. But anyways, back to Pinnacle Emissary. For one a blue and a red, we have an artifact creature robot at rare. It is a 3/3 that has, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, and this token can block only creatures with flying. So both of those two cards together is already a combo. And I didn't even get to the part where it has warp for an Izzet. So a hybrid Izzet. You can either pay blue for this cost, or you can pay red for this cost. So it itself is an artifact creature. So it itself would trigger Memnon, whether you're casting it for its full casting cost, or whether you're casting it for its warp. If you have this on the battlefield and then you warp in or cast another one of these, then on cast you would get a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, which is an artifact entering the battlefield, which triggers the other thing to give something +1/+1 counter, which could just be the drone. This card is, I think, cracked. Again, I think being an Izzet, you're just so incentivized to just play VV stuff rather than play something like this. But this card is insanely powerful. The fact that you can warp this in to start, pooping out these flying, they're flying. Sure, they can only block other flyers, but you're trying to be aggressive if you're doing this. This card, and it's a cast trigger, so even if your opponent can counter the artifacts that you play after you play this, you're still going to get this card is cracked, pushed, insane. Yeah, this is definitely a build around. This is definitely a way to try and do go wide in current standard. You've obviously still got rabbits, but this is another very, very powerful card. One of the best cards in the set, I think. Wow. This is the first time I really looked at this card. Incredible card. Let me just read it again, make sure I'm not missing anything. There's no once per turn. Yep, nope, this card is just cracked. Space-Time Anomaly for 2 white and a blue. So 2 generic white and a blue. We have a sorcery at rare. Target player mills cards equal to your life total. An interesting card. There's an interesting amount of mill stuff in this set. I shouldn't say an interesting amount. There's really like two. There's the board wipe that mills half their library, as well as board wiping. And then there's this card. This is clearly supposed to play with Hope from the Final Fantasy set, where that card mill your opponent for, on instep, you mill your opponent for the amount of life that you gained, so that you're already trying to gain a bunch of life. And so if you have, you know, if you have a fairly high life total, this could just be 4 mana, mill your opponent's entire deck. And it does say target player, so if you are doing some sort of self-mill nonsense, you could target yourself with this to mill a fairly significant chunk of your own library. I personally am not a huge fan of like just straight up mill cards, especially at 4 mana. But if you're trying to do the hope stuff, this fits right into it. So there's that. I don't in limited, I think this card is like ridiculous because you've only got a 40 card deck and you still have 20 life. You're still starting at the same 20 life total. Your life total doesn't scale. So it's not that long after the start of the game that this could, if you have any sort of life gain things going on, or even if you don't have any sort of life gain things going on, but you're relatively healthy, you can just 4 mana, your opponent's dead. This is going this is going to cause rage moments from people in limited, where they're like, oh yeah, I've got a board ready, I'm gonna get ready to kill my opponent, and they just go space-time anomaly. The one good thing about that is it is cards equal to your life total. So it's not as if an aggressive player who is just beating down against their opponent really has to worry too much about this card being like, oh, they ripped it off the top. Suddenly the aggressive player's deck's gone and they untap and die. Because if you're beating down, then the amount of mill that you're going to be hit by with this is significantly less. So that's nice. But if you're in some sort of board stall or whatever, and you're not playing counter spells, and then your opponent just goes, all right, they just wall up, and then they go, ha, space-time anomaly, nice deck, idiot. That's gonna cause, you know, monitors to be broken. So pretty powerful and limited if you can build around it. I don't think it quite makes it in constructed outside of the, you know, some fun hope stuff. Station Monitor. For a white and a blue, we have a creature Lizard Artificer at uncommon. It is a 2/2 with whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 drone with all the same drone stuff that we just saw. A colorless drone artifact creature token with flying that can only block other things with flying. Like that they are clearly doing what anyone who is monitoring a station would do, which is just goofing off instead of actually monitoring. They've got their food next to them. They got like their popcorn next to them. They've got some kind of controller in hand. Looks like they're like controlling some sort of drone. instead of actually monitoring the station. Anyways, this card, I mean, it's fine. If you're able to consistently trigger its second spell trigger, if you can go this on turn 3 plus another card, you immediately get a 1/1 flyer, and constantly spitting out flyers. Seems pretty good. Multiple of these seem terrifying if you're able to draft multiple of these. Constructed viability, like, it's got a lot of similarities to Corey Steelcutter. Them not having prowess and not having haste means that it's significantly less powerful than Corey Steelcutter. But it's borderline. Next is Servandum Sunstar Exemplar. For a white and a black, we have a legendary creature, Human Knight, at rare. They are a 2/2 with Vigilance and Menace. And whenever another creature you control dies or is put into exile, put a +1/+1 counter on Servandum, and you gain 1 life. And then whenever Servandum dies or is put into exile while its power is 4 or greater, destroy up to 1 target non-land permanent. Sheesh. This card's great. This is another one of those story spotlight legendary creatures. Well, I think we saw the uncommon version of them prior to this. It's a 2-mana Knight. Knight's interesting for Dion stuff. Vigilance and Menace. So can get in attacks pretty well. Fits into the sort of Orzhov self-sacrifice stuff. And a lot of those Orzhov self-sacrifice lists also care about life gain, especially if you're trying to do like the Raise the Past combo-y versions of the deck, where you're trying to do the Starscape Cleric, gain a bunch of life, and turn that life gain into life loss for your opponent. Also, whenever another creature you control is put into exile, so that is if you are warping things, they are getting put into exile. So it triggers off of things that are getting exiled at the end of their warp or at the end of their warp turn. And then if it dies or is if it itself dies or is exiled, as long as it has 4 or more power, which shouldn't be that hard to get to, just needs, in some sort of self-sacrifice strategy, just needs 2 other things to have died at that point. 2 other things you control died at that point. Just blow up something of your opponent's. Also, very interestingly, like, this is incredible protection against, I forget what it's called, the replacement for it, but the temporary lockdown effect, right? If this has more than 4 power, then if your opponent tries to play the new temporary lockdown, that exiles Servandum, the destroy target non-land permanent trigger goes on the stack. You destroy the thing that just tried to exile it, and then all the stuff comes back. This card is great. Maybe too great, especially for that, because that card's supposed to be there to stop aggressive cheap creatures. Aggressive cheap creature strategies. And temporary lockdown was one of the temporary lockdown-esque effects, was one of the good ways to handle raise the past strategies, because you're both getting rid of those things off the battlefield and not putting them into the graveyard to just be brought back with raise the past. Yeah, it also really hurts Rest in Peace if you're trying to use like Rest in Peace as a sideboard answer for those decks. Like, you might have already done enough damage if you're able to land a Rest in Peace, but if you land the Rest in Peace and then destroy, you can't really destroy Servandum, because it's going to be exile. It's going to die. It's just a leave the battlefield trigger. Not literally a leave the battlefield trigger, because if you bounce it, then it's not going to trigger. But you know, you can't Sunfall it or whatever the new version of it. You can't just kill spell it, because then it's going to get rid of the Rest in Peace. This card's cracked. This card's just cracked. Another one of probably the best cards from the set. This card's really, 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 really good. I've been thinking that you might want to do non-raise the past versions of that sacrifice deck, but this might just be pulling me back in the raise the past versions of the Orzhov sacrifice list. Both the life gain triggering your Starscape Clerics for the combo kill, and the fact that this just makes your temporary lockdown effects just absolutely irrelevant as long as it had an additional 2 power on it. Sure, if you get it down quick enough, if you get down to temporary lockdown quick enough that it's the trigger, the 4 power or greater trigger is not going to go onto the stack, then fine. It's still a decent answer for a board. But that's pretty terrifying as somebody who took Azorius Control to Mythic this last season. Dauntless Scrapbot. For 3 generic, we have an artifact creature robot at uncommon. It is a 3/1 that when this enters, exile each opponent's graveyard, create a lander token. This card's fine. I don't think that it's really going to see play in Constructed. If you're really looking for a 3 mana graveyard answer, then Kutzel's Flanker is still in the standard, because I think it's LCI. Sure, you have to be in white for that, but if you had to be colorless, then you've got Soul Guide Lantern, you've got Ghost Vacuum, you've got plenty of options. But for limited, if you need to deal with graveyard strategies, plus regardless of whether you're dealing with graveyard strategies, this is still just a colorless way to create a lander token to ramp later in some sort of limited strategy that cares about landfall. This is perfectly fine for a limited card. Pinnacle Kill Ship. For 7 generic, we have an artifact spacecraft at common. When it enters, it deals 10 damage to up to 1 target creature. It has station. It turns on at 7 charge counters, and it is a flying 7/7. So this is kind of like the space. It's really supposed to, for limited, it's supposed to be the spacecraft-ish version of a Meteor Golem. Meteor Golem can hit any non-land permanent. This only hits creatures, but costs 7 mana, is generic. If you're really just looking for a way to deal with if you really need a way to deal with your opponent's big thing, then this is an option for you. In the same ways that for any reason that you would pick up a Meteor Golem, you could pick up Pinnacle Killship outside of dealing with non-land permanents. And that's really the reason that you're playing this. You're not really turning this into a creature. Thaumaton Torpedo. For a single generic, we have an artifact at common that has an activated ability of 6 generic. Tap this, sacrifice this, destroy target non-land permanent. This ability costs 3 less to activate if you attacked with a spacecraft this turn. So this is probably even more your Meteor Golem effect. It sort of gets around any weirdness that you might have with a Meteor Golem being a creature that could possibly be blinked or reanimated or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a draft card that you'll know when you need this card. Bring it in on game 2 if your opponent has some bomb non-land permanent that or even creature that you normally wouldn't be able to deal with. Onto our remaining lands. There aren't that many lands left in the set. Let me look at my preview list. Yeah, and I think we're only at 2 other cards left. We shouldn't even be at 2 other cards left, but they're just mislabeled. So we'll get with them in a second. So we already saw the cycle of colored rare lands for last week. This is the final rare land that we got. Secluded Starforge. The land at rare has no land type. It taps for generic. Sorry, it taps for colorless specifically. And then for 2 generic, tap X untapped artifacts you control. Target creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. I mean, it's fine. Being forced to do it at sorcery speed is a little awkward, but maybe if you could do it at instant speed, it would be too powerful. Because you could be like, okay, I'm going to attack with 3 things. You only have 2 blockers. And I'm just going to pay 2. Flip this onto whichever one is unblocked. I'm going to tap a bunch of artifact tokens and kill you. But, you know, it's still fine-ish. You can sort of just, like, essentially do some exalted stuff with, if you have, like, a bunch of artifact creatures and a bunch of artifact tokens, and you just be like, you, get in there. They're gonna be forced to trade with you. Go with God. And then it still has another activated ability of 5 generic and tap it to create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. This is a pretty good land. I think if you're just like, I want a land that generates tokens, then Fountain Port's still going to be in standard, and there's so much more value out of Fountain Port, being able to sacrifice tokens for card draw, being able to make treasure tokens to let you ramp or double spell or whatever, and then being able to create the 1/1 rabbits. Sure, it's at the cost of a life, but you're still being able to just consistently provide small pressure against an opposing control deck, which is why you like sort of token generating lands. Here it's 5 mana instead of 3 mana and a life to create a much more imposing creature. This you can activate at instant speed, and then they are themselves artifacts, so you can use them to as part of the tap activations for the first part of this land. If you're like, I'm creating a bunch of tokens, and then, oh, I drew my Meringue River Regent off the top. I'm going to do my Meringue River Regent now, bounce your 2 blockers, and then I can just go, all right, or bounce a couple of your bounce your flying blockers, and then I can turn these 2/2s into power for the meringue to get in. I think if you have any sort of artifact synergy, then this is probably better. Well, I shouldn't say better. This is in a conversation with Fountain Port. If you don't have any sort of artifact synergy, then I think that you would just rather play Fountain Port almost exclusively because you can turn your artifacts into card draw. But when Fountain Port rotates, this is very good. It's going to be a while, but it's going to happen eventually. All things must end. And we got 2 other cards. They were mislabeled when I looked at them. Let me double check that I haven't already talked about these cards. Here's... No, and no. Yep, so I did not talk about these. These are just mislabeled in the list there. So Zoo Ifrit, Osteoharmonist, for 1 black. We have a legendary creature, Human Wizard, at rare. It is a 2/3 with tap. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's a skeleton in addition to its other types and has no abilities. Activate only as a sorcery. Very weird card. So repeatable reanimation is powerful, but you are stripping the thing of its abilities, whether they're static abilities, activated abilities, enter the battlefields, which is typically the best type of reanimation targets. Your Atraxas, your Atalis, things like that. So this mostly plays well with big things that were already mostly just a dumb idiot. Which, like, I'm trying to think, like, the biggest, best dumb idiot is, like, Yargle and Multani, but that's rotating. You know, in Foundations there was Gigantosaur, but this strips it of all abilities, not like just like fun abilities. Even if you have some big thing that has trample, you're losing trample. The only other thing that I can think that's like kind of interesting to think about this is that it turns them into skeletons, and we still have Corpses of the Lost from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So like maybe there's still some discussion about turning big things into big dumb idiots, but they would still have haste. And this is a layers thing, so someone would have somebody at the judge level would have to really get into the nitty gritty. My brain would say that the Corpses of the Lost would still give this skeleton +1/+0 in haste, even though it itself has no other abilities. But that's if you want the exact answer, find a judge or wait for the pre-release notes if they talk about it there. I don't really think that this is going to see play in like your reanimator stuff, whether it be like the Jund Dinos reanimator things or your Zombify or your Rakdos reanimator things, because all the things that you're trying to get back have triggered abilities that are useful. Your art, even post rotation, your Arden is you're reanimating Arden because you want it to reanimate something else. Your Valgavoth has statics that you care about, and not just like the being a leyline of the void, a flying leyline of the void. It would no longer be a flyer. It would no longer have ward. It would no longer have lifelink. It would just be a 9/9. Sin, Bahamut, Knights of Round, all those things have abilities that you care about. So you're gonna if you're gonna do something like this, I think you're almost certainly gonna have to play it in a deck with Corpses of the Lost. And I think if you're gonna do a deck with Corpses of the Lost, just be more aggressive. Don't do the reanimator thing. Then finally, the other out of order thing, Melt Strider Eulogist. For 2 and a green, we have a creature insect soldier at uncommon. It is a 3/3 with whenever a creature you control dies with a +1/+1. Whenever a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. Not really constructed playable. Fine in any sort of limited strategy that has +1/+1 counter synergy, so that you've got some protection against board wipes or against removal. This itself doesn't give anything +1/+1 counters, nor has any way to give itself +1/+1 counters, so you need to be pretty heavy into that strategy already. But if you're already in it, then this is a fine card. It's one of those payoff. It's a payoff to the strategy, but not an enabler. So do with that what you will for your limited drafting. Yeah, I think that is the end. Let me just do one more double check on pictures. MTG, EOE. Yes, that is the end of this round of spoilers, and that's the end of all of the spoilers for Edge of Eternities. Ooh. That is many hours over many streams of me yapping about Edge of Eternities. I will be back at some later date between now and pre-release, where I talk about the cards that I think are going to be good in standard, cards that I think might develop their own archetypes, cards that I think might have cards that I think that might have been overhyped, cards that I think that might have been underhyped, all that jazz, so that somebody can come back later and tell me how wrong I was. And I do think that I want to, at some point as well, go back to my Final Fantasy wrap-up stream and my Final Fantasy spoilers wrap-up stream, where I talk about the cards that I think are going to be good and bad and etc., and talk about my hits and misses back then, because I think that's a good thing to do, to reevaluate how you thought about something. Mostly because I want to talk about how wrong I was about Cecil. But yeah, anyways, with all that, that's going to be the end of the stream for me. Thank you so much for watching. Anybody who might have stopped on by, nobody in chat, but anybody who has been lurking, stopping on by, or watches the VOD, I appreciate you regardless, and I will see you next time I see you.